We are going to continue today with A Prophet for Today by Rabbi Stephen Przansky. Here it is. And we're coming to the next stage of the story of Givon. I want to finish up the greatest concern that we had, which was the treaty made with Givon that we're still coping with today. Right? So I'll begin where we left off. Yehoshua defeated 31 kings. One nation, the Girgashi, fled. One nation, the Givonim, stayed under false pretenses and tormented the Jews for centuries. To host an antagonistic tribe with nationalistic pretensions and which resents and rejects Jewish claims of sovereignty to the land of Israel precludes not only peace but also stability, tranquility, and even a modicum of security. This is a very timely statement, sadly. That is not to say that the mere removal of foreign hostile elements brings peace and security. It is to say that the mere presence of foreign hostile elements always engenders instability and insecurity. That is the dilemma that Yehoshua first confronted here, and that has bedeviled generations since, including our own.
What is the word?
It has never let us go. Bedeviled means that it's on top of us all the time in a negative way. Like the devil is, it's a term. It should be obvious that the land of Israel cannot sustain two nations with incompatible and mutually exclusive claims of sovereignty. But this point has as yet not penetrated the Jewish psyche or been accepted by most of the Jewish people. Hence the endless pursuit of peace plans, schemes, conferences, initiatives, and roadmaps, memoranda, understandings, accords, each with a place name or a proper noun preceding it, and above all the immersion in a, quote, peace process that leads to ceremonies and treaty signings and not much else that is productive or enduring. Treaties, as we learned in dealing with Givon, will tie the hands of who? The Jewish people, but not necessarily our foes. There's a concept within Islam that allows for making what appears to be a permanent peace treaty, but in fact is a tactic in order to rearm and prepare for the next battle. And we see this is the nature of our dealings with our enemies today. We will be constrained through our desire to avoid Hillel Hashem, or even just as a consequence of our innate yearning for peace, to treat the signed document as sacrosanct, notwithstanding our realization that our enemies are sophisticated enough to use platitudes and flowery locutions, phrases, as weapons of war, to sap our morale and rally the international community against the very nation of a Jewish state. Our enemies are not constrained at all by what they sign or the promises they make. It's an interesting thing, Israel, in its last war, went to tremendous lengths to avoid civilian casualties, with a great deal of success. Some mistakes were made. It's the nature of the chaos of war. The U.S. State Department used terms like abomination and impossible, unacceptable on the part of Israel. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff made a public statement that Israel went to, quote, extraordinary lengths, did everything it could to avoid civilian casualties. The following day, a member of the press at the daily briefings of the State Department asked State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki, how do you pair up this position of the State Department and a position of the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, who is an expert on military strategy, and she said, the State Department speaks for the administration, and basically the general is entitled to his own view. Didn't change, right? This is our problem. This is exactly the same problem with the Gevonim. We see it here, that we try and do everything we can, right, to avoid being ruthless, to avoid being perceived as a villain. And we still are, right? And our enemies do exactly the opposite, and they get off scot-free. Interestingly enough, in the last few weeks, right, the Egyptians have destroyed hundreds and hundreds of homes in the Sinai. They're digging a moat now, so that if you dig a tunnel, it will be flooded, right? And they've told the people of Sinai, get out. Anybody reading a lot of material on this? I think you every now and then can see something on the internet. I don't see it in the New York Times at all. No place, right? There is a hullabaloo about if a Palestinian stabs a woman to death, that his home could be destroyed. Right? This is a war crime in the eyes of the international community. This is the essence of our problem, and it goes back to here, to Givon. Right? Our enemies are not constrained at all by what they sign or the promises they make. In 1996, note here, 1996, the Hebron Accords prohibited the Arabs from, among other things, possessing machine guns. They agreed to this, right? The Hebron Accords, they agreed to this. Nonetheless, they celebrated the signing of the agreement by, anybody want to guess? Wildly firing their machine guns in the air, blithely unconcerned that this was a flagrant violation of the agreement that they had just signed. The avoidance of a Hillel Hashem does not justify national suicide, and certainly requires an elementary fairness on the part of the observer. A potential Hillel Hashem does not ordinarily require a Jew to unilaterally surrender his rights and relinquish his just claims. It certainly does not require a renunciation of our rights to the land of Israel. On the contrary, that surrender and retreat might be per se, in fact, a Hillel Hashem. We learn this from Yehezkel 36:20, in which it says, "And they desecrated my holy name, Hillel Hashem, when it was said of them, quote, these people of Hashem, these are the people of Hashem, but they departed his land." Right? And so Ezekiel sees giving up the land as a Hillel Hashem. The rest of the world sees trying to hold on to the land as a Hillel Hashem. I'm going with Ezekiel on this one.
Yeah, when Naomi left Eretz Israel, it's a problem.
Right, that's right. That's right. And yet the Jewish people have are gripped, understandably so, by the desire to sanctify God's name and the revulsion of any possible desecration. How can Tosafot say that the Gevonim will never be cured, not even in the future? Remember, we read this earlier. Especially if we posit that Sancheverov came and mingled the nations. So this is a reference to the conquest of the great Assyrian king Sancheverov, who, when he conquered the 10 tribes and the rest of the world, mixed the nations together. He did this in order to destroy national desires in those people that he brought to Assyria, right? We know that Yaakov did this in Egypt, that he moved people around, right, in order to give greater power to the central government, right? And of course, in our own history, Stalin did exactly the same, right? This was a tactic taught first by Yaakov and then by Sancheverov, but the question is, if Sancheverov did this, right, how do we know who's who? How do we know who's Amalek? How do we know who's from Givon, right? It's a problem to know this, right? Listen to what he says. Okay? It's a problem to know it, right? We know who Jews are because they actually weren't mixed, right? The tribes stayed together even in Assyria. We know this by the Assyrians and by our own records. Sancheverov came and mingled the nations. The answer is, how do we know this? The answer is that even at the end of days, there will be a nation like the Gevonim, who will attempt to draw near to us with their words and their professions of morality. They will decry the evils of nationalism generally, but only intend ours. They will mask their aggression with rhetoric of religion, and they will urge all so-called monotheistic religions to unite, but under their banner and at their behest. Sadat tried to do that, by the way. Sadat often spoke of his desire to build a worship center for the three major religions in Jabal Musa. Jabal Musa is where Muslims hold that Moshe is buried, right? And it's in the Sinai Desert, of course, right? But after Israel surrendered the Sinai Desert to his control, he never actually did build it. He just talked about it.
When Jews had the Sinai,
yeah.
This was a...
The Gevonim represent that enemy of Israel who knows how to exploit our basic goodness, to shackle our hands with treaties that violate the Torah, weaken our resolve, and debilitate our defenses. Yehoshua's only solution was to attempt to bring them close to Torah. His plan did not succeed, and the Gevonim and their spiritual descendants remain to vex us until today. Yehoshua failed to consult the Urim V'Turim to ascertain the best approach, much as Shimon and Levi did not consult Yaakov in advance either. Some mistakes linger, sometimes for centuries, sometimes for millennia. So it seems that he's talking about something that we have trouble relating to, right? In the sense that he's seeing Israel's position as a result of missing the boat spiritually and religiously. And many of us see what's modern Israel,
okay.
Yeah. That we're plagued by the Gevonim today, and we're acting the way Joshua did then, right? We have a tendency to say no.
Can I interrupt you? We do it because, for different reasons, Joshua did. He did it, again, we're returning to the same argument, because he didn't want to do Hilul Hashem. That, okay, Jews sign it and then they,
Right.
But modern government, you say they have the same...
What I want to I want to get to this point, because I think it's an important point, is that Joshua was coming into the land from the desert, right? And he came with many problems, many struggles, and he accomplished what he accomplished, right? What does it mean to avoid a Hilul Hashem? Right? To do a Kiddush Hashem? What does it mean? A Hilul Hashem, when our children are going to pick apples, their teachers say to them, behave properly on the bus. The bus driver is probably not Jewish. How is he going to see us? Right? When, we drive in our cars and we look Jewish, drive in a way that makes a statement about the firstborn of God, that they are certain kinds of people. Many of the things we do, right, we view as impacting who we are in the eye, who God is in the eyes of the rest of the world. We believe, for many reasons, that we're His representative here in trying to fulfill a mission. Right? And if, as a representative, we are uncouth, we are dishonest, we are immoral, we're rude, right? We're immoral. Right? What kind of God is this that has such a representative? Right? So we're constantly, not just by the word of the law, but by the spirit of the law, feel this issue as a representation. Right? On a national level, we could simply say, this is a political thing to try and keep American money and weapons coming to Israel. And that's what it's about. But what does that mean? What does that mean? We want to remain in the favor of the American people, right, who elect a government every 4 years. We want to be seen as a proper, righteous country, right? Our definition of righteous, because many of us are not religious, right, may not be exactly in the context of the Torah. But it is certainly much more aligned to it than many other countries are. Whether it's done because we're proud to be religious Jews, or whether it's done because there is some sense that that is our requirement in life. It is not as distant from Joshua's drive as it may appear. Right?
I will disagree with you, because for some reason, against their own people, they don't behave with the same, sensitivity. When people was moved from Gush Katif, people was moved brutally. People till now don't get compensation.
I agree, and the appearance of it was Israel is willing to make sacrifices, right, in order to find peace in the world among the nations. That was the appearance of it, and that was the goal of it, right? It failed miserably. Joshua failed too, by the way, in this process. And, you remember, David turned over 8 children of Shaul to the Givonim to kill, right? This is not a new thing, right? Why? Because he felt that was the requirement to do it, right? So these are not new issues, and they're not new issues today either, right? The fact that in history we have been more and less religious at different times doesn't seem to change our sense of something very deeply ingrained in terms of a moral sense, right?
Was it accepted by sages of the Talmud that it was a mistake?
There doesn't seem to be anybody argues that there's a benefit from this decision.
Benefit?
I can't tell you that he's saying it's a mistake, right? Brzezinski, right?
But Talmud doesn't say. There is no opinion,
He doesn't bring a source for his view, right here. But the Gemara does not make an argument that this was a good decision. It doesn't make it.
But it doesn't say that.
They are the Givonim remain unrepentant. They are in a more difficult situation than Mamzers are, in terms of coming into the nation. If you look at the argument in the Gemara, it's not 10 generations; it's always that they will not come back, right? And they are right in the center, the heart of our nation. These people, right? So it doesn't seem to me that anybody thinks this was a great solution. The best people can argue is the one that he's argued already. That there were neither solution was a good solution, and he chose this one. Right? But I think that we continue to make this choice, and when Rabbi Kahana took a position, right, he was seen, as beyond the pale in terms of what a Jewish physician should be. Moshe Feiglin, what's his name? Feiglin. Also finds himself in that situation, right, regularly. Right? So it's not something that has. It's not something divorced from the past at all. I don't think.
But you know what? But my question is, everyone did mistakes. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joshua with the Givonim. It's like we're repeating the same mistakes. The question is, David, he couldn't go to a high priest and to ask him a question? What do you mean? He just takes 8 children of the king and gives them to Givonim to kill? Even today, nobody in our government does such a things.
So our government is actually at a high moral level, you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying. But
all I'm saying is that it's not so clear.
But he saw all these mistakes. How he can do this? How he can take kids of the king and send them to Givonim?
Does anybody remember why we're learning this book? Why this book survived? Right. Remember, there was hundreds of prophets. They wrote books. Remember what we said at the beginning? The books that survived, right? Some people say that the significance of the prophets of the books that survived was that they were dealing with national issues, as opposed to coming to the prophet and say, where should my son go to university? Right? Which was also something the prophet did. Right? But the prophets that we have are ones that dealt with national issues. It's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that the Navi that survive are because they are lessons for us now. For us now. The reason I think this book is an important book to learn, Yehoshua and Rabbi Brzezinski's views on it, is for exactly that reason. we know that unlike other religions, that our religion is filled with errors in judgment of great people. Errors in judgment, by the way, that we can identify with. Fathers and mothers can identify with. Heads of governments can identify with. Mistakes that are made of great people, great and holy people, but not perfect. And they're recorded in these books, and in this book specifically, right, so that we analyze our situation today. This book is a book for today. It's not a book for 3,000 years ago.
The book in order to learn what not to do, or it's a manual what to do?
Both. When he did it right, it's a manual of, clearly we think that they did pretty well everything right, at Jericho, right? Pretty well, it would seem that the Gavonim affair was one that should have been prevented. It should have been prevented, right? One could argue it could have been prevented with better analysis before agreeing to it. It seems he was so anxious to agree to it that...
By the way, if they would take Givonim, whoever, not government, not a king, but people who wanted to become part of the nation, and made them their slaves, they would be able to convert them, free them and then convert them.
They were their slaves.
That we don't convert.
They were their slaves.
We don't convert.
No.
Right.
There is a way to...
There's a status that... but they were not... I don't think that they were ever to be freed. This was their responsibility always for the Gavonim. That they were to serve in the temple. I don't think that there was a way out.
But they were not personal slaves of anybody.
Of the Kohanim.
They were personal slaves.
Absolutely.
Would a Jubilee year, 7th year, will affect it? No.
Not at all.
Not Jews.
Not at all.
It's just only for the Jews.
Not at all. No, they were, as long as they lived in Israel, existed in Israel, right, they served the Kohanim. That's the whole argument about when Shaul killed the Kohanim of Nov, right, he destroyed their revenue, their livelihoods, their ability to continue. That was their argument, right? Not only did you wipe out some of our people, but the plan was to destroy us completely. Right? That's the argument they made. That was Shaul's plan, was to destroy us completely by destroying those that we were bound to. Right. Okay, we'll continue? Okay. The land of Israel is essentially a holy land. This is very, very important. It's a holy land. Its sanctity is its defining characteristic. Remember, all the beauty that we identify with Israel is relatively new. For a very long time it was swampy, it was deserty, it was ridden by different diseases. In the last 150 years, under the very delicate touch of the Jewish people, Israel has returned to what it should be, and with the blessings of God, to be this magnificent place, right? But it's a desert. It's part of a desert, Israel. It's not a part of by its nature. And it was, whenever the Jews are gone, it reverts that status.
Even northern part?
The only part that it describes it as not, actually, is where the Dead Sea is today, right? Which was fed by a delta at the time. Right? Now that's changed as well. So it's not a place, that it's the place that doesn't have oil. Golda Meir said in the Middle East. Well, it turns out that the oil's not in the place; it's in the water nearby. Its preservation is not dependent on uprooting this or that people, but on uprooting and dislodging false ideologies. This is a very, very important idea to understand. It's not about people, individual people. It's about their ideologies. Right? God vomits them out. And by the way, we should have our own concerns when we practice false ideologies, that God may come to judge us in a negative way. We hope not. At this point, we hope that there's enough that the balance stays there. Right? False ideologies. that on occasion required destroying those nations that subscribed to these ideologies, which was the premise of the wars against Canaan. Thus, any individual or group that wished to renounce its corrupt doctrines was welcomed into the Jewish society. It is enough for nations to abandon their idols, and they are partners in Tikkun Olam, the perfection of the world. They need not convert to Judaism. They can remain Noachites. They become part of the class of Avadim Hashem, of those who serve Hashem, who carry out His will, and they benefit all mankind. Eventually we will arrive at that moment. Until then, we find ourselves in Yehoshua's position, dealing with foreigners inimical to our religious and national destiny, and attempting enemies of, right? And attempting to devise solutions that show no greater possibility of success than did his. The challenges then becomes moving forward and building a model Torah state, notwithstanding the difficulties and the perplexities and the uncertainties. Yehoshua's challenge when he entered the land of Israel is still our challenge as we return to the land of Israel. In summary, the confrontation with Givon introduced the vexing issue of dealing with indigenous non-Jewish population in the land of Israel, especially a population that understood how to exploit for its own nefarious ends the Torah, our goodness, and our yearnings to sanctify God's name in this world. Yehoshua's resolution was the best under the circumstances, but the Givonim never fully assimilated into Jewish life and remained a troubling phenomenon that hindered the stability of the Jewish state. You would think that's the end of the name of Givon. It's enough in this book, but it isn't. The next chapter is called The Miracle at Givon. Now, there is a medrash that says when God split the sea for Moshe and for the Jews leaving Egypt, that water everywhere in the world split. I think we're all familiar with that. People drinking tea saw their water split in the cup. People going for a little swim in the lake saw the lake split. Right? It's a medrash. Right? And what it's telling us is the size of that miracle, right? That it was global, right? In the Torah, it's not global, right? In the Torah, it's one body of water, and that's, by the way, enough to be miraculous, I think, for all of us to be content. In Tanakh, the miracle of Yehoshua is greater, in fact, than the miracles of the Exodus. I say this with certain trepidation. But if you pause for a minute and think about all of the plagues and the splitting of the sea, they were local. What Yehoshua did was, or what God did at the request of Yehoshua, was to stop the sun in the heavens and the moon. Which means that the entire world and other worlds beyond their own would be impacted by this. To do this, right?
We consider it's not a midrash. We consider it's literal.
It's literal. Oh, it's absolutely literal. Yeah. Let's read about it. We'll read about it. We won't finish this today, right? But let's get started with it. Chapter 7, Miracle at Givon. The miracle at Givon, when the sun stood still during the battle with the kings of the Amori tribe, is one of the most celebrated in the Bible. Yehoshua stood before the people and declared, "Sun, stand still in Givon, and moon in the valley of Aeon." Right. The question is, why was it necessary? It certainly was not a military necessity. As the miracle occurred after the Amori had already been routed and were fleeing the battlefield. So it wasn't a requirement to win the battle. At that point, Yehoshua requested the miracle, which essentially prolonged the day of combat. For what purpose? And how is this miracle different from other miracles? The Ralbag commented that if we understood this miracle literally, the sun standing still for an extra day or so, then it would have had a global impact. Its effect felt, for example, in a corresponding period of extended darkness in South America. That would quantify it as one of the greatest miracles ever, equal, if not greater, than the splitting of the Red Sea, and surpassing even the miracles of Moshe, which only affected limited areas. And certainly there was no greater miracle worker than Moshe, whom God had known face to face, as evidenced by all the signs and wonders that God sent him to perform in the land of Egypt. Yehoshua, the disciple, could not exceed the supernatural accomplishments of Moshe. Consequently, the Rabbi maintains that the sun did not actually stand still, but rather the earth's rotation slowed down somewhat. So in fact, the sun shone a little longer that day. Most of the traditional commentators reject Ralbag's approach, and the Abarbanel notes that the slowing of the earth's rotation is also a great miracle. What's the difference between the sun standing still and the earth slowing down? It's equal. In fact, the same miracle the Navi refers to explicitly, Rav Chizdei Karakas, a philosopher who preceded the Abarbanel by one generation, construed the miracle in completely naturalistic terms, as if the battle itself was hastened so the day appeared longer. So this is another view, right? They just, you know how you can speed up the movie? And everybody moves like very, very fast, right? It's kind of funny, right? So that's what they did. They had the battle very, very fast, and they won it. And they said, wow, we did this and the sun is still up. It was amazing, right? Must be the sun is not going down as a miracle. The problem with all this is that Yehoshua actually asks this to happen after the battle, right? The Amori are on the run at this point. That approach, too, is spurned by traditional commentators. What did happen? What were the causes of this battle? And what was the significance of this miracle that finally secured our conquest of the land of Israel? Right? We're coming to the end of the story of the conquest of Israel at this point. The Navi relates that Adonai Tzedek, the king of Yerushalayim, witnessed the fate of Jericho and Ai, and the surrender of Givon, and immediately tried to rally the support of his fellow kings. He sent word to the 4 kings dwelling in south of Yerushalayim, "Come up to me and help me, and let us smite Givon, for it has made peace with Yehoshua and with the children of Israel." You see the problem here? Right? Already. Now Givon is in trouble because they made a deal with the Jews, right? Right. A note here. Chazal note that the kings of Yerushalayim until this point were always called Malki Tzedek or Adonai Tzedek, king or lord of justice, as Yerushalayim was known as a place of justice. Adonai Tzedek here felt that the terrible injustice was being perpetrated against the Canaanite tribes. Right? This is a descendant of Shem, by the way. Okay? Yehoshua, in Yehoshua it says, this is the first reference in Tanakh to the city of Yerushalayim. In Bereshit, Melchizedek, the king of Shalom, greets Abraham upon his triumphant return for the war against the kings. Yerushalayim is a compound word consisting of Yeru, they will see, and the name Abraham gave to the place, and Shalom, perfection, its initial name. The Yud in Yerushalayim is usually dropped in Tanakh in order to maintain the integrity of the word Shalom. The Chidah mentioned that Yeru is identical gematria of the numerical value as Yera, he will see, as if to say it's yet to come. Right? Okay, so he called them to come fight with him. The kings, Yehoshua was encamped in Gilgal, northeast of Yerushalayim, and Givon was located northwest of Yerushalayim, almost in the center of the country. These kings, who were situated in the south of Yerushalayim, feared Yehoshua was coming for them next. The kings had no interest in fighting Yehoshua. They wanted to attack Givon because it had the audacity to break ranks with them and negotiate their own treaty with Israel. They had envisioned a Canaanite solidarity, a united rejectionist front against Israel, and Givon had breached, and now they wanted to topple Givon as a lesson to others. This certainly evokes in our days a widespread revulsion towards Egypt in the Arab world after Egypt signed its treaty with Israel in 1979. Almost every Arab state severed diplomatic relations with Egypt for its ignominious act and its crime against the Arab people. Here the kings of Canaan presaged that event and were outraged by the treachery of Givon. So you see, this is a very interesting thing. What happened was because Givon managed to fool Joshua, and they succeeded in making a treaty which preserved their lives, they become the number one most hated people in the neighborhood, right? And rather than go after Israel, the Canaanite tribes are going after one of their own.
Yeah, but you said in order to address their internal problem, that their own people wouldn't initiate.
We're coming to that. Barbanel states that the kings decried another ominous development. Peace had been made between Israel and not the king of Givon. It says in Yehoshua, had been made between Israel and the inhabitants of Givon, right? The people of Givon. But not the king of Givon, not Melech Givon. The people had risen up of their own initiative in a profoundly precocious act of democratic self-expression. Do I hear the Arab Spring? And concluded that they did not want to fight Israel or die in their king's feudal wars. They negotiated a treaty on their own and essentially rejected the authority of the king. The other despots of Canaan, this rebellion, with its democratic impulses, was a dangerous phenomenon that they could not stand. If unchallenged, their own monarchies would be threatened, not by Yehoshua, but by their own people. The kings united and marched against Givon. Notwithstanding the devious circumstances of its treaty with Israel, Givon appealed to Yehoshua for military assistance. Do not loosen your hands from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the Amorite kings who dwell in the mountains have gathered against us. The Malbim explains that there is a difference between save us and help us. Saving, Yeshua, denotes a complete salvation, whereas help, Ezra, is partial rescue. The Givonim requested both. Like good diplomats, they desired the former, but would settle for the latter. Right? They wanted a complete thing, but they would settle for just, let's win this battle. There's a couple. Okay, I'll just finish this and then I'll read the notes. Okay. The Malbim in Yehoshua notes that, interestingly, the two leaders brought the Jews into the land of Israel from exile, Yehoshua and Ezra. Ezra's entry reflected his name, God will save, a complete salvation effected by Hashem's through open miracles. When Ezra's Yehoshua's entry reflected God's name, God will save, a complete salvation effected by Hashem through open miracles. When Ezra help returned with a small group of Jews at the beginning of the Second Temple era, the people were unworthy of open miracles and so had to reconquer and resettle the land on their own. The divine assistance was natural, not miraculous, and the salvation was incomplete. The third return to Israel in our day is still awaiting a clear definition. God willing, it will be both. And then there's a little note historically that when it became apparent over the years that Egypt's peace treaty was in word only and did not mark a substantive change in hostility towards Israel, most Arab states, aside from several rejectionists, restored diplomatic ties with Egypt. Since the mid-1990s, Egypt has had a sitting ambassador in Israel only sporadically, and as the cold peace has grown even colder. This was written 10 years ago. Yeah? Okay, so let's finish up here. Yehoshua responded immediately. So the Givonim made this request, and Yehoshua jumped. Yehoshua responded immediately, moved his army to Givon, and then was seized by fear. Hashem pacified him. Do not fear, for I have delivered them into your hand. Not even one of them will stand against you. But what did Yehoshua fear? The Medrash records that Yehoshua was tormented by one thought. Should I impose on our community, the Yidden, the burden of defending these insincere converts of Givon? Was it worth committing our forces and risking Jewish life to defend these people who with malice aforethought had just deceived us? Hashem answered, yes. If you distance those who are already distant, you will ultimately distance those who are near. Hashem's love for every Jew, and especially converts, must prevail. In truth, there is no person who is without blemish or flaw. Therefore, if one starts to discriminate between Jews based on some perceived shortcoming, eventually everyone will be subjected to bigotry. There will always be a reason why this Jew or that group of Jews does not measure up to my or our standards of perfection, and therefore does not deserve the protection of the community. Perhaps it is their background, their level of scholarship, their observance, or the place of their residence. In Israel, outside Israel, or some less favored location, even within Israel, or something else. And the Torah's fundamental mandate, you shall love your neighbors yourself, is a commandment, not an ideal, essentially reflecting the reality that not every Jew is inherently lovable. Nonetheless, we are commanded by Hashem to love our fellow Jew as an expression of our love for him. We love all Jews, not just those who are lovable, but especially those who are not yet lovable, says the Rabbi. If such distinctions between people are made, nevertheless, then it is a slippery slope indeed. Eventually, the number of Jews worthy of universal protection will be whittled down to a very, very small class. But Hashem's goodness is unlimited. He does good for the wicked and the good. Yehoshua was taught to emulate God in this respect. Not only were his fears misplaced, but as the leader of Israel, he was also obligated to intervene on behalf of the less favored group of quasi-Jews. The unusual relationship with Givon was the first reason why the miracle here was necessary. In Hebrew, nes, literally miracle, also means a banner, a flag. We had this conversation just last week about the Nesion, the test that Yitzchak and Abraham underwent at the Akedah, that it was in fact a flag. A nes is something that calls the attention to God's presence on earth. The miracle of Givon focused people's minds on the war and the Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name. It engendered. It was a lesson to the nations that not only did the Jewish people refuse to nullify a treaty enacted under false pretenses, but we would even go to war to defend our new allies. The war took place amid the supernatural effects so that it would be surely be noticed and remembered. Yehoshua proclaimed, sun stand still in Givon. But the sun stood still not only in Givon, but throughout the Middle East. The phrase associated with Givon would forever trigger memories of the battle, and who fought, Israel, on behalf of whom they fought, Givon. Maybe we should hold here.